So even though repeated sums or repeated addition or groups of objects, we might sometimes call it, even though that is the most common and typically the first way that we would introduce the idea of multiplication, there are other models that we can sometimes use. And so one is when we have these counting problems or lists or order pairs or trees, which are basically just ways of showing that we're counting, right? So this is when we have a number of choices for one thing and then a number of choices for another thing. And technically, we could do this with more than two things, right? So, like, I'm making a sandwich and I have, five different choices of lunch meat and three different choices of cheese, right? And so that would be an example of this. But then maybe I also have like two choices of pickle. So then I could do times the choices for choice three, right? So you could do this with a lot more than two, but we'll just focus on two for right now. And we look at this example, it says a bakery sells cakes in flavors of white chocolate, red velvet, and carrot cake. And then it says each cake is frosted with either buttercream or chocolate buttercream. And we want to find how many different combinations of cake and frosting does the bakery offer. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of underline all my choices and I'm going to create some abbreviations. I'm just going to stick with like W for white. So I'm going to keep this pretty basic, but I am going to use some abbreviations just to make things a little bit easier. So I'll use just C for chocolate. I'll use R for red velvets. And then I already used C for chocolate, so I'm going to use a capital C and a lowercase a for carrot. Let's see, I haven't used B yet, so I could use B for buttercream. I have used C, I've used C and I've used CA. How about CB for chocolate buttercream, right? You can use whatever you want, but you definitely want to label it so that somebody could follow what you're doing. So one thing we could do is we could just list all the possibilities, right? So let's just start with the first one. So the first choice of cake was we could have white cake, right? Well, if you chose a white cake, then you could get it frosted with buttercream, or you could also get it frosted with chocolate buttercream, right? So WB would be like white cake with buttercream. WCB would be white cake with chocolate buttercream, right? And then move on to the next one. So like my next one would be chocolate cake. And I'm just going to go ahead and do the two possibilities there. So I'm either going to get it with the buttercream or I'm going to get it with the chocolate buttercream. That's probably up my alley, chocolate and chocolate. So then we could do red velvet with buttercream. Sounds a little weird, but we could do red velvet with the chocolate buttercream. And then finally the carrot cake. Again, it's a little weird, but I guess technically you could get carrot cake with chocolate buttercream. So you can see we're just listing, right? This is just one way to go through it. Now you can see this one wasn't too bad to list. That's because we only had like four choices and two choices. This gets very big very fast. So imagine we had three icing options, right? Then this gets a lot bigger. Or now we're going to add sprinkle options, right? Or other things that we could do to our cakes. So this does get a little tedious. You can also list them as ordered pairs, which is the exact same thing. It's just, it's maybe kind of nice because you can tell where one starts and the other stops. So I purposely kind of use like capital and lowercase so that I could tell the difference. But like, if it gets a little hard, like WB, what does that mean? Like, is that one thing or is that two things? So listing it as an ordered pair with a comma in between would help clarify that a little bit, right? So it's the same idea. You would just still list all the things, you're just listing them instead as ordered pairs, which lets you see like, hey, CCB, that really means the first C is the cake, the next C goes with the icing option. So I'm gonna list, it's the same, in this case, 8 options, just as ordered pairs. And then finally, another way you can do this is with a tree diagram, and this is the way that I prefer. because this can kind of help you keep track if you have a lot of choices. Like I said, this one's not bad because there's only 8 to list out. But if you had more than that, it gets very tedious. So when you do your tree diagram, you can do it left to right, and then like branch off of those, right? You could also do it top down, so it does not matter, right? I'm gonna go ahead and do it top down. And so I would always have a root, right? So we always start with a root, which is just basically I'm choosing to go get a cake, right? And then on this one, I'm going to choose that root, which is right here. That root has 4 branches coming out, and that's because I have 4 choices of cake, right? So my choices were white, chocolate, red velvet, and carrot cake, right? So that would be my first string of choices. So you can imagine like if I were going to do a problem where I'm doing coin flips. So I flip a coin and my coin's either going to be heads or tails, right? If I flip a second coin, then off of each one of those, I would do heads or tails, right? Because the first one could be heads and the second one could be tails. If the first one is heads, then it could be heads or tails. But if the first one is tails, it could still be heads or tails, right? So sometimes you'll see the same choices on each one. On this one, we're going to see different choices though. So we're not going to branch off with more cake choices. Now, off of each one of these, we have 2 icing choices. So each one of these would have 2 branches. So you can imagine like if after this, if I decided I was going to do like 3 choices for types of sprinkles to put on the icing, then each one of these would have 3 branches coming off of it, right? I'm not going to do that because I don't have that in this case, but so in mine I'm just having 4 cake choices and then 2 icing choices. So that was buttercream or chocolate buttercream. And I would just do that on each one. So if I chose a red velvet cake, I either am getting sorry, that's supposed to be a B. I'm either getting buttercream or chocolate buttercream. If I get a carrot cake, I'm either getting buttercream or chocolate buttercream. And so what's nice about this is you can follow every single branch, and that's how you can come up with your list, right? So you can use the tree diagram to come up with a list, and it's a little bit easier than trying to list them all out, especially once these get bigger. So you would just follow every single branch. However you do this, you can see that on my tree diagram, the total number of end branches that I have is 8, which makes sense because I had 8 choices here. And so technically, we did that with a visual, but you technically could realize that all we really had to do was multiply, right? So we had how many cake choices? We had white, chocolate, red velvet, and carrot. That's 4 cake choices. And so if we had realized it, the faster way is just to multiply, right? So 4 cake choices times 2 icing choices. And so if you realize that, then you would not have to actually draw this out, but draw it out if the student needs it. And that would give us the total combination. So 4 cake choices times 2 icing choices gives us 8 total combinations. So there's 8 different possible cakes that could be made if you look at combinations of icing and cake type. And so again, like you could do this with more. So like I said, if I were to add to this that we have 3 icing choices, yes, you could keep listing or keep doing your tree diagram, but really you could just multiply, right? 4 cake choices times 2 icing choices times 3 sprinkle choices would actually give me 24 combinations, right? So you can just multiply to find our answer.